Like fairy tales, mythology retellings are super popular with readers. Gods and goddesses make an appearance in everything from historical fiction to superhero stories, which is why today I want to talk about how to write strong person versus supreme being conflicts. Mythology stories are one of the most popular forms of person versus supreme being conflicts in creative writing. Another one is faith stories. These types of stories and conflicts are unique because person versus supreme being is both internal and external. Most other conflicts are either or. Before we can dive into that, we do need to talk about what I mean when I say supreme being in person versus supreme being conflicts. That supreme being could be a literal god or goddess. It could be the Christian God or the Muslim Allah. It could be a pantheon of gods and goddesses, like in Hinduism or Greek mythology. But it could also be more like the universe itself or some other all-powerful force acting against your characters. And other creatures besides gods and goddesses can count as a supreme being as long as they are significantly more powerful than the other characters in your story, and they should be nearly, if not completely, immortal, so they're difficult to defeat. That means angels and demons count as supreme beings, so do ghosts and other supernatural entities. If you hang on until the end of this video, I'll tell you how you can get a free character creation chart, which will help you quickly develop these characters so you can get started writing. This is Ignited Ink Writing, a channel dedicated to helping authors like you transform your writing so it lingers with your readers, because writing that lingers gets remembered and recommended to others. I'm Caitlin Burvey, editor and author. Let's dive right into using external person versus supreme being conflicts. When you have an external person versus supreme being conflict, they are physically battling in some way. They might be competing or at odds with one another or all out fighting. Now remember, in order to count as a supreme being, that character that your main character is up against must be significantly more powerful than them and difficult, if not impossible, to kill. So often in these external conflicts, the main character is hoping to beat the supreme being, but not necessarily eliminate or kill them. For example, Rick Riordan's Percy Jackson and the Olympians series features all sorts of person versus supreme being conflict where the god or goddess is beaten but not eliminated. Percy Jackson, the main character, is up against the pantheon of Greek gods, including Zeus, Hades, Persephone, and a bunch of others. In The Never Prayer by Aaron Michael Ritchie, the main character, Lena, faces both internal and external forms of person versus supreme being. The beings that she is up against are angels and demons. So here's an example of the battle between the demon and the angel. All the world wants to eat, and I'm gonna gnaw on you and Lenny a while more. The cold demon sprouted wings, sprouted claws, then dove toward them with his supernova of light. Chow didn't move. He was going to let Beals kill him. Beals' sword stopped a kiss away from Chow's skull. The blonde demon giggled. In The Never Prayer, high schoolers and this fallen angel are up against a demon. And while this demon can be defeated and sent back to the place it came from, it cannot be killed. The same goes for the angel. This part of the conflict is external because they're having a literal fist fight and sword battle. There are bombs, weapons, locked doors, and fists. If you're trying to write a similar external person versus nature conflict, make sure your supreme being is difficult to defeat. If it's too easy, they don't really count as a supreme being anymore. It's more like a person versus person conflict. So, make sure your supreme being is difficult to overcome. Maybe they can't be killed, so they have to be trapped. Maybe the way to defeat them is complicated, so it's hard. Look for ways to reinforce the fact that this is a supreme being, not just any other character or force that your characters are up against. That's what external person versus supreme being looks like. It's very similar to person versus person conflict. Next, let's talk about using internal person versus supreme being conflicts. When your person versus supreme being conflict is internal, it is dealing with things like faith, fate, and prophecy. These are the most common internal person versus supreme being conflicts. They take place largely within your characters. For example, your character might struggle with faith in the goddess that they worship. They might struggle with accepting a fate or prophecy that's about them. Often, chosen one stories are not just about the chosen one fulfilling the prophecy. It's also about the chosen one coming to terms with being the chosen one, accepting that responsibility, and fulfilling the prophecy. In the Never Prayer, Lena, the main character, must learn how to move on, how to let things go, and how to take responsibility for her life by making hard choices. Here's an example of that. Over and over, she thought of Chow, offering to take the purse, telling her she was stupid for not letting anyone help her. Chow telling Tabitha how to do the things she was afraid to do. Tabitha helping Lena even when the outcast girl probably knew she was just being used. And suddenly it was 6:30. "Okay," Lena said. She stood up, lifted the bulk of her red purse, and walked over to the counter where Grandma Scar was sitting. Lena held the purse out, so heavy, so wretched. "Okay, Grandma, I'll let you help me." In this moment, Lena is finally asking for help. And on the surface, this might seem like a person versus self conflict, because it has to do with internal growth and internal conflict. But in the context of this story, it is actually person versus supreme being, because Lena and all of the other characters have been under the influence of the demon long before they even knew of the demon's physical presence. In this moment, Lena isn't just battling her own pride to ask for help. She's battling the influence of the demon that is forcing people to almost become the worst version of themselves, to make the bad, easy choices instead of making the good, hard choices that are going to improve their life. So in this moment, Lena is pushing past that supernatural influence to make a better choice. When we have internal person versus supreme being conflict, it can look like this. It can look like the character is struggling with a part of themselves when really it's the influence of that supernatural entity that they are battling. It can also look like struggles with faith and with accepting one's fate. So that's what internal person versus supreme being conflicts can look like. Next, I want to share an editor and author's advice for person versus supreme being conflict. When you're dealing with a person versus supreme being conflict, remember to think of how it's influencing your characters both internally and externally. Unlike the other types of conflict, this one really is a mix of both, and it's the most effective when you have both aspects of it. In Richie's tale, the characters are facing the demon's influence internally, long before they face it externally. Slowly, over the course of the story, it switches from a mostly internal conflict to a mostly external conflict as the characters finally start to battle the actual reason for their suffering. Also, both the internal and external forms of person versus supreme being conflicts often deal with themes like good versus evil and right and wrong. Embrace that. Readers love those themes. Maybe try and twist it to make it unique and something special for your story, but realize that that's almost an innate part of person versus supreme being. Another type of person versus supreme being story is afterlife stories. These often deal with supernatural entities that are all-powerful or significantly more powerful than your characters, and they often deal with both internal and external conflict, because there's the internal conflict, beliefs, coming to terms with death, and then there's the external, literal act of death. An example of person versus supreme being internal and external conflict in an afterlife story is Andrew Watkins' To Live Forever, an Afterlife Journey of Meriwether Lewis. In that book, the ghost of the famous explorer Meriwether Lewis must help a kidnapped little girl escape and reunite with her father. Over the course of this story, Meriwether battles other supernatural entities who are working on the side of evil to keep the girl where she is, and has to come to terms with some things about himself, like what death means for him, where he might move on to, what he really wants to leave behind. This story wouldn't be nearly as effective if it only had internal person versus supreme being conflict, none of those external forces working against Meriwether. And it wouldn't be the same if it was only those external person versus supreme being conflicts, because then we would lose that growth of his character. So afterlife stories are another great example of internal and external person versus supreme being conflicts. Not all supreme being stories have literal gods or goddesses, have angels and demons. Sometimes it's things like ghosts. If your story features the afterlife or religion or something else related to supreme beings, ask yourself how you can use that supreme being as both an internal and external conflict your characters have to face. What's your favorite person versus supreme being conflict or story that you've read or written? Share it in the comments below. And for more videos on conflict and other aspects of writing, subscribe to Ignited Ink Writing, a channel dedicated to helping authors like you transform your writing so it lingers with your readers, because writing that lingers gets remembered and recommended to others. I'm Caitlin Burvey, editor and author. To find out more about me, go to www.ignitedinkwriting.com. There you will find the character creation chart that will help you create both your main human characters and your supreme being characters. It's also linked in the description below. And to see how I deal with more subtle person versus supreme being conflicts, go to caitlinburvey.com, where you will find my book, When Magic Calls, a collection of modern fairy tales. You'll also find my other stories, books, and merchandise there. And now it's your turn to use both the internal and external forms of person versus supreme being conflict to ignite your ink.